Okay, everybody, welcome back. Good to see you guys. It's 9:55, so it's about 5 minutes, and then we'll get our class started. So just hope you guys are doing well so far and having a good start to your day. I'll be right with everybody. Hi, Jason. Good to see you. Hi, Janice. Devin, Gloria. Nice, good to see you guys. Morning, Angel. Mia, Paula. I guess now it's March. That's nice. I like the change of weather, the extra hour of daylight that happens when we spring forward with daylight savings. Birthday coming up, so it's a nice time of year. Hi, Jocelyn. NBA championship, I mean, basically I think the Lakers are going to win, but they're having some trouble right now just for a few games with AD sitting out. If it wasn't them, I mean, you just look at the star power of Brooklyn and you feel like they should contend. But in my mind, I think it's like too much talent almost, like especially just the way that like James Harden likes to dominate the ball. I think it's going to create weird issues of who's the kind of alpha player in the playoffs. But, they're one of the strong contenders in the East. But I think that LeBron James is the favorite every year for as long as he's played, pretty much starting with when he started going to the finals almost every year. One meal for the rest of my life? That's a tough call. Really tough one. I don't know. I've always been a big fan of seafood. Yeah, I like seafood a lot. Sushi's great too. But then I like Mexican food a lot. I like pasta. I guess if it's just one thing forever, probably like a really fancy pasta for a drink. Well, if it's the only thing I can drink, this is like my last meal maybe. I don't know. I'm a big fan of Arnold Palmer's and stuff, so I'm always drinking big pitcher of like unsweetened iced tea with juice, and then a dessert. Creme brulee, bread pudding, pie. I'm a huge fan of pie. A la mode with some ice cream. So yeah, random. But those are some options. Hi everybody, good to see everyone showing up. Just another minute or so until it's class time. Peachy's back. What's up, Peachy? Peachy? Huh? Good morning, everyone. Just another few seconds here. Yep. She'll be popping in and out like usual. Kind of too bad that Eddie has decided not to really be on camera this semester much. It's fun to show him off, but Peachy's hogging the attention. Okay, so great, everyone. Thanks again for being here. It's pretty much 10, so I'm just going to get things rolling. Appreciate your guys' attendance and all your hard work so far throughout the semester, and we're still just getting started in the overall big picture of our term. So tomorrow, not tomorrow, but Thursday, don't forget your first essay is due. So hopefully you've had some time to develop your essay and work on it. If you haven't, then definitely get to it because it's due Thursday morning before 10 a.m. So you'll just email me your essay whenever you're ready to my email address, rvulich@fullerton.edu. And you just include your attached document, which has your essay there, and I'll be grading it after that. So just a little reminder and notification. Don't forget that we do have our first essay due on this week on Thursday. So I've also been replying to different student drafts. Some students have asked for some comments. I think at this point it's perhaps a little late for me to get to more of them, but I did my best over the weekend replying to all those drafts that I received in advance of the weekend and during the weekend. So yeah, let's go ahead then. What we're doing today is we're going to continue on the topic of ethics, which we started on last week. Ethics, the study of morality and moral concepts like right and wrong and good and bad. One big ethical theory that we went into good detail on last week was utilitarianism. So Jerry, you asked, do you need to include your name or anything specific in the email? Well, the email itself, usually I just leave it to people to decide how they want to write them. Some students are very minimalist and they just attach the document with no message at all. Me, I always would like to say, hi, professor, here's my essay, thanks so much, and take it easy. Just a little brief message, but it's formally, it wouldn't affect your grade at all. As long as you send me the essay, I'm going to know who it came from because of the email account that delivered it to me. So I don't have any specific rule on that, but it's always nice to just write a little short message anytime you send a message out on email, I guess. I know a lot of times, probably in this current generation, we're just so used to not dealing with email. It's like everything is, messenger, chat, like just on different social media apps. And the interaction with professors sometimes gets eliminated because a lot of them want you to just do everything through like Canvas and never really interact with them personally. But yeah, you have to send emails, and so I find that to be an important thing. That's why I want it to be done that way. So no specific requirement, though, of how you word your message. Just attach the document for sure. Okay, ethics, that's our topic. It's all about right and wrong, good and bad. One big ethical theory was utilitarianism from last week. So just a couple of last words of review. John Stuart Mill wrote about utilitarianism. He was a British philosopher of the 1800s. And basically, the theory says that you should always act in the way that will create the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. So that means when you're doing things in life and you're trying to decide the right action morally, utilitarianism would advise that you estimate the total amount of pleasure that each action could generate for as many as people as possible. And then whichever action would generate the most total yield of overall pleasure, that one is the one that's right to do. And so you just act in accordance with whatever is the greatest utility or pleasure. Not just for yourself, but for all affected in a given situation. And we talked about how that's based on the greatest happiness principle, how he thinks and argues that pleasure or happiness is the only thing that we pursue as an end and not as a means. We applied the principle to the consideration of some easy cases like choosing pizza toppings. And then I tried to talk to you guys about some of, thanks, yeah, little dust. Then we just tried to show what are some criticisms of utilitarian theory, and that was last lecture, most of what we talked about. One criticism, that it's a theory fit for swine. Some people heard that it's all about promoting pleasure, and they focused on that and said, well, pleasure is what animals are focused on, like pigs, and aren't we better than that? Oh, thanks, Angel, appreciate it. And, so some people thought if we're being told to promote as much pleasure as we possibly can, then that's telling us to live the unsophisticated, bestial lives of, animals that can't do anything other than seek pleasure. But when he hears the objection, Mill replies back by saying, no, it's not a theory fit for swine. True, it does focus on pleasure, and it says to seek as much and promote as much as possible for as many people as possible. But he corrects the critic by saying, when I mention pleasure, I don't just mean lower pleasures. So he distinguishes between higher and lower pleasures. Higher pleasures are pleasures that only humans can enjoy, like attending a philosophy lecture, reading a book, watching a film, listening to music, playing an instrument, playing sports, using technology. These are uniquely human because it takes a higher level of intelligence and cognitive ability to do those things. On On the other hand, though, there are lower pleasures, things that animals can also enjoy, like eating, sleeping, sex, just movement, activity. And what he's claiming is that he's not emphasizing the lower pleasures in his theory. Instead, he's saying to maximize all pleasures humans are capable of, and he even goes a step further by making a point that the higher pleasures are of greater value even than the lower ones are. So he says that's why it's not really a theory for swine. There's higher pleasures too. After that, the last two objections that we covered at the end of class were that it's sometimes seen as too demanding, the utilitarian theory, because it's just your standing obligation at all times to do whatever creates the most overall utility, even if that action is inconsistent with what you personally would prefer or what would make you happier, and even if it's inconsistent with established bonds of loyalty and familiarity that you might have had with some people as opposed to others. And then last, there was the point that it could be seen that no action is absolutely forbidden in principle according to utilitarianism. So that's very disturbing, because it means that at least theoretically it's possible for an action like lying, stealing, or even killing to be justified morally if it generated more total utility than the alternative. And in scenarios that we talked about last time, it seems like that strikes against some people's fundamental notions of morality, like it's always wrong to, for example, kill an innocent person. But what if doing that would have led to the safety and survival of a greater number of other people? Okay, so anyway, now we've finished with the utilitarian stuff, and we're going to talk about another ethical theory today to compare that with. So there's not only one ethical system in philosophy and in the West. There's definitely others, and the major rival and competitor against utilitarianism is this. It comes to us from this man. His name is Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant, this is a German philosopher who lived from 1724 until 1804. So he had his 80 years life, and it's mostly in the 18th century, but just slightly into the 19th. In 1785, he wrote a very important book. He wrote a lot of books, but this one book that he wrote in 1785 is considered perhaps one of his most important. Peachy, can we just lay down a little bit? Okay. Sorry, she just wants too much attention. I got to move her off. Go down there, Peach. Okay, so in 1785, he wrote a very important book, which is called Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals. Okay, so Kant, Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals from 1785. We have some sections from this book that are printed in our anthology in our textbook, and so that's what we're looking at. In some translations of English, because it was first written in German, it's called Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. Grundgesetze in German. So, but anyway, Grounding or Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. This book is all about his theoretical account of what is morality and what's the basis of morality. It's considered a classic, and that's why it endures through the ages, and we're still learning about it today. So Kant's ethical system has sometimes been named after him and called Kantianism. So utilitarianism was John Stuart Mill's contribution to ethics, and Kantianism, named after this namesake, is Kant's lasting legacy to ethics. So we're going to learn all about Kantianism then and see how it is much different actually than utilitarian theory was. So this is just some stage setting for you, the author, title, and publication, and dates of his life. Okay. So what's up with Kantian ethics? That's our question. All right. So the first thing I would tell you about Kantian ethics is that it's not at all concerned with the consequences of what a person does. Utilitarianism, we learned, is a consequentialist ethical theory. It's a member of the consequentialist ethical system. And so that means that according to utilitarians, it's the consequences that come after your actions, the results, the effects of what you have done, which are definitive of the morality of the action. I drew this little diagram when we learned about utilitarianism. Suppose this was a person, and they do an action, and the arrow represents time passing afterwards. If I would draw the letter C at the tail end of the arrow, and kind of highlight it here, let's imagine that that stands for the consequences that happen after you do something. In utilitarian thought, these consequences matter more than anything. These consequences, whether they're good or bad, will answer whether it's right or wrong action. But now we're dealing with Kant, and so I'm crossing this out because this is not his system. He doesn't agree with this principle. His view is that instead of looking at the consequences to judge the morality of an action, we should look at something else. We should look instead at the intention that the person had when they committed the action. So he says the morality of the action depends on the individual's intention or will when they did the act. So that suggests a different little picture to us. Suppose there is a person, and instead of looking forward to the consequences that happen later, let us direct our attention back to the intention that they had when they did the action. So I know it's not a perfect diagram, but what I'm trying to show with this picture is this arrow loops back and points to the head where the letter I is shown. This letter I, let us say, stands for the intention the person had when they did the act. Intentions are formed prior to the consequences because the intentions are formed before you do the action. The consequences don't happen until after the action has been committed, but the intention is already there in the beginning. So what Kant thinks is that we should judge whether the act was right or wrong by considering what the intention the subject had was when they did the action at the point of action. So instead of looking forward to later on consequences and results, Kant's moral philosophy directs us back to the point of action and the intention the person had at that time. So in Kant's view, as long as you act with a good will and with good intention, then that is sufficient for your act to be morally permissible. It does not matter, according to his theory, whether the consequences of your good, well-intended act are favorable or unfavorable. So consequences to him, basically, they just don't matter. Only your intention does. So if you had a good intention and somehow it didn't produce good consequences, that still wouldn't have any kind of negative bearing on the morality of the action. The act is morally permitted as long as it's done with a good will and good intention. So let me give you an example that will help to show you the structural differences between utilitarians and Kantians. So imagine this case, okay, really fast. Suppose that you're driving around somewhere, and while you're on your drive, you notice that there's a vehicle which is stalled and is sitting parked off on the shoulder of the highway. So nobody else is there with this person. They seem to be, in their car seated off to the side of traffic. And let's suppose you have some extra time and you just feel friendly and want to be helpful. So you decide to pull to the side and be a good Samaritan and just find out if they need any type of assistance or help, right? So you're just a passerby motorist, but you want to see if this person needs help. So you do pull over. Now suppose as you walk up towards where they are sitting in their car, you notice that they're actually unconscious. And the reason is because they're not responsive to you and your questions. You get up to them, you see they're still seated in this driver's seat, and you're like tapping the window, asking, hello, excuse me, are you okay? Can you hear me? Are you all right in there? Did something happen? What's up? And they're just not answering your questions. They're unconscious. But you know they're alive because you can still see their chest heaving as they breathe in and out. And so now you look a little bit more at the front of the car to assess what's up, and you notice that there's a little damage to the front of the car, like it's been in a minor accident, and there's also like some small tendrils of smoke coming up from underneath the hood of the car in the engine area. So let's imagine that you, looking at these facts, become a little concerned for the well-being of the driver of that car, because since they're now unconscious, they can't do anything to remove themselves from the car. And now that you saw there was a little smoke, your concern is that maybe if they're not removed quickly from the car, perhaps something bad could happen. Maybe it could catch fire or explode or whatever. So out of caution and concern for the person's health and safety, let's just suppose that you took the step of gently moving them out of the car and laying them off to the side on the side of the road. Okay, so that's what you did. Why? Again, because of fear that the car could catch fire or something. So anyway, a few moments pass, minutes pass, and now first responders are arriving to the scene. When you first got there, it was just you and the one person, but now there's some paramedics and others. They're arriving, and they see you and this person, and they ask you some questions. So as they come up, they say, hello. So first of all, let us know, who are you? How do you know this person? Are you guys related, or what's your relationship? And you say to the person, actually, no, I totally don't know them, but I'm a good Samaritan. When I was driving by, I saw their car like this, and I thought maybe I could stop to help. And when I came over, I could see they were unconscious. And then they ask you another question. They say, okay, great, but let me know, how did they get on the ground? When you came up, were they already outside of their car lying on the ground? What happened? How did they get there? And now you say, oh, okay, well, no, they were still in the car, But if you look, you can see there's a little damage towards the front. And what I wanted to do was move them out of there because who knows? I don't know. I've seen enough movies where these things blow up. So I wanted to move them out of the car for their safety. And now suppose that the paramedic person is kind of getting a little annoyed and they say things like this. Well, come on, I know that you meant well, and that's great. But the thing is, you probably should have waited because you need to wait for professionals to assess the severity of the person's injuries and move them in a way that minimizes the possibility of further injury. Like if you don't know whether they have a spinal fracture or whatever, then maybe moving them like this without a proper backboard and a neck brace and a system to make sure they're immobilized properly. If you move them without those tools in place, then it's possible that you could have caused a worse severing of the vertebra and you could actually induce paralysis. Did you know that? And now you're like, okay, sorry, no, I guess I didn't, but I was just trying to help and I did what I thought was the right thing. So anyway, let's suppose as we finish this hypothetical that they get the person back to the hospital, and as it turns out, yes, because you moved them prematurely before the paramedics arrived, you actually did cause a worse injury to be sustained in their spine. And now because of that, they've got no motor control from the neck down. They're paralyzed. So in a way, I mean, clearly what you have done in this case has made things worse for our individual. You meant well, but if you had not even been there and if you had not intervened, then this person would have been properly cared for and they would have had full motor control for the rest of their whole life. So your action, the consequence that it generated, was that it took a lot of happiness and pleasure away from the whole remaining part of this person's life, all the pleasure and happiness that would have come from having motor control from the neck down. Okay, so you heard the scenario. Now I want to return to the two ethical theories because we're just starting to flesh out the details of Kant. But even at this point, when you know that he's all about the intentions and utilitarians are all about the results, let's ask, according to utilitarian ethical theory, would this action be considered wrong or not wrong? The action of moving the motorist out of the car. Just let me know whether you think a utilitarian would say this was wrong or not. And maybe you can also back that with an explanation of your answer. Like, why would it either be said to be wrong or not? So question, utilitarian theory, would it be wrong or not having moved the person? So first two students that are giving the answer are giving opposite answers. I wonder then if either of those two can tell me why they have that answer. Kobe, it does not produce the most overall pleasure. Yes, that's putting it lightly. Not only does it not produce the most overall pleasure, but it manifestly produces the opposite, pain, misery, psychological and physical, because of the way that this has induced a further, more grave injury on the person. So it really did not make anyone happy. Quite the contrary. It destroyed a lot of happiness. So if you had not moved them, they'd be way happier. Moving them took away happiness. So Brandon, you say in utilitarian theory, this would be wrong because the consequence is not providing the most happiness. Oh no, it's okay, Naaman, I understand, but you're ahead of the game. So we'll get to Kant in a minute. But I'm just starting with the utilitarian stuff. Utilitarians would say, yeah, it was wrong because all that matters are the consequences. Maybe you meant well, maybe you had the best of intentions, but hey, look at the results. They were not good for human happiness. So that's all that counts to a utilitarian, results. But now look at it from Kant's theoretical perspective. And Naaman, I guess you're already onto it. So what do you think? Would the Kantians say this was wrong? Let me know whether in Kantian ethics this was a wrong act or not, and why or why not. So we heard the utilitarians say, yeah, that would be wrong just because of how bad the results were and how destructive of happiness they were. But now with Kant, put on your Kantian ethical thinking hat, what do you think is Kant's ethical conclusion of this example? Was the action wrong or not? And just why or why not? So you'll let me know. Okay, so let's see here. Janice, not wrong because the intentions were pure and good. Yes, that's correct. That's right. So intention good, outcome bad. But intention is all that matters to the Kantian. Just don't worry about the consequences. Just set your mind to act with the right and good intentions. To act with a good will is all that really matters from Kant's point of view, and let the consequences play out however they may. So it's a way different way of looking at ethics. Instead of trying to always generate the most happiness with each action that you can take, you're instead directed to just set your mind to act with the good intentions in the first place. And then however the consequences play out from there doesn't affect at all the morality of the initial action itself. So you might be wondering, what is it to act with a good intention then? You know, is it something just everyday and common sense, just try to do the right thing? Well, in a way, it's actually much more complex for Kant. He has a sort of technical definition of what it is to act with a goodwill. He says that you act with a goodwill when you act from the motive of duty to uphold the moral law. And the goodwill, he says, is the thing that we should focus our minds on in ethical life for a few reasons. Number one, consequences are sometimes a matter of pure speculation, and it's not always 100% clear what the consequences are or even what the probable consequences could be. So if we are directed to try and generate the best consequences for human happiness, sometimes we might be at a loss because we just won't be sure which action will do that. And also, he says, sometimes the consequences are totally out of your control. You know, you can try to produce right consequences, but then circumstances can intervene to upset your well-laid plans and produce a bad outcome in the end. So Kant says the only thing you can really be held morally responsible for are your intentions, which you do have total control over. Consequences are sometimes out of your hands, but the intentions that you bring to an action, those are totally up to you, and you can at least make sure that they're good. So try to act with a good intention, and then everything else from there is kind of not relevant to the moral question. So it's just a difference of view. You know, from utilitarians, the intentions aren't really important, only the results. From the Kantians' view, the results not morally relevant, but the intention is. So one is forward-looking to the later consequences, and one is backward-looking to the intention formed in the outset. So then let's learn what it is to have a goodwill, and also why is it that he thinks the goodwill is so fundamentally important to his ethical system. He says that it's so fundamental because in his writing, he says, the goodwill is the only thing in the world that is unconditionally good. And all other desirable character traits or attributes are not unconditionally good. So let me write that here and I'll explain it. This is why he thinks the goodwill is the sort of center stage concept in his ethical system. Because the goodwill is the only thing in the world that is unconditionally good. Goodwill is the only thing in the world that's unconditionally good. So I'm going to explain this and expand on it, but one last point. There's a saying some of you may have heard that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Now, I don't think I agree with that saying, because in a way it's very cynical. It sort of says to you, you could have the best intentions ever, but sometimes even when you have those good intentions, things don't play out favorably and everything kind of turns out wrong. What is this moral philosophy called again, Leo? Kantianism. Kant's ethics is Kantianism. Some people also would place Kantianism within the broader framework of what is called deontology. So since you've asked me, Leo, let me give you a very detailed answer. In the first place, it's called Kantianism, named after Immanuel Kant himself. Kantianism. Just like Buddhism is named after the Buddha. Anyway, Kantianism comes from Kant. It's not religion, but it's his ethical philosophy. But Kantianism kind of falls within the broader domain of what's called deontology. So, you know how I told you that utilitarianism is a member of the consequentialist school of ethical theories? Kantianism is also a member of the school of thought called deontology. Deontology is the ethics of duty, which says that you just have to do your moral duty regardless of the consequences. So, Kant says, do your moral duty regardless of the consequences, and specifically the moral duty he thinks we have is to always act with a good will. No good deed goes unpunished. That's another interesting one, Kobe. Yeah, it sort of has the same kind of resonance as the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I just hear these sayings, though, and it seems to me like, what am I supposed to learn from them? Don't do good things, or just expect them to basically blow up in your face and backfire, or don't have good intentions because basically you're probably going to lead to a negative outcome. I don't think I could take them in a positive way, but anyway, yeah, I just mention them in passing because sometimes people do think that you can have good intentions and things still don't work out well. From Kant's point of view, though, the fact that it doesn't work out well doesn't matter morally. because morally we're just going to judge you based on the intentions themselves, not the results. Okay. Deontology, do your moral duty regardless of the consequences. That's a concept that applies to Kant's ethical system and also a few others. Like another member of the deontology school of thinking is called divine command theory. Now, we're not learning about divine command theory in depth, but I'm just going to say in passing that that's the ethical framework which says that your moral obligation is just to do whatever God commands, divine commands. So you have to do what he commands, and you're not allowed to do what he says not to do, what he commands you to not do. So if it's like thou shalt not steal, that's a forbidden act morally. And if he commands you to do something like keep the Sabbath holy or whatever, then that's morally obligatory. The problem with divine command theory, as contrasted with Kant, is that it involves religion. And so if you didn't believe in God, you couldn't follow divine command theory. Also, there are issues of translation and interpretation with any religious text. So someone might say, what is God really asking me to do? Because here it says, thou shalt not kill. But over in Leviticus, it says, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, or he that blasphemeth the name of the Lord, all the congregation shall stone him. So what is it? Shall we never kill, or should we kill in some cases? And now it becomes a matter of complex interpretation. And then the last main problem with divine command theory is that it does raise philosophical problems. Like, can God just make anything obligatory simply by commanding it? What about killing your own child? Because there is a story in the Old Testament, the story of Isaac and Abraham and Isaac, I guess. And God commands Abraham, who he gave the covenant to, so he's like the most loyal to God possible. He says, Abraham, I want you to kill your son Isaac. Do it as an offering to me. Bring him up to the top of Mount Moriah and slay your son. And Abraham is vexed by that commandment because it's God. And so his view is whatever God says is right and righteous. So if he wants me to kill my son, I guess I have to do it. But of course, on the other hand, he's thinking, why would God want me to do that, though? I mean, I love my son. I mean, can you imagine having a child and thinking I'm supposed to kill him? It'd be the worst thing you could ever do. So he goes up to the mountaintop preparing to do that. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with these Old Testament Bible stories, but when he gets him up to the top of the mountain, he's preparing to kill his son Isaac, who he dearly loves. At the last moment, God replaces Isaac with a ram. And so he spares Isaac, and then he slays the ram, and that becomes the offering to God on the mountain. But it doesn't resolve all the philosophical problems and puzzles, because like this question remains. Could God have forced Abraham to kill Isaac, and would that have been moral? Or was he inevitably bound to withdraw the command, because no matter what, killing a person's child is never going to be okay? If it seems like he inevitably had to withdraw the command, then it's not really moral because God commands it. God commands it because it's moral. On the other hand, if he could have made this a moral requirement for Abraham, then morality starts to seem totally arbitrary and just based on whims and directives that are given without any kind of intuitive moral force. Anyways, that was a little bit of a sidebar. You can say that it was justified because it was a test of his faith. Sure, Kobe. But again, what I'm telling you is, if it's a test of his faith, and God inevitably would never have a person kill their own child, then that means that the source of morality doesn't really issue from the commands, because the commands can't just be whatever. There have to be commands that are consistent with some intuitive and prior to religion sense of what's right and wrong. So it's sort of like, can his commands about morality just be arbitrary? Like command a person to commit a terrible act, and that's now moral. If inevitably he was bounden to not follow through on that heinous request, then it seems like ethics isn't really within the domain of God's choice, but it's something that independently exists. But anyway, I just wanted to mention it in passing because, Leo, you asked, what's the Kantian ethical philosophy? It's Kantianism. But as with utilitarianism, we can trace the roots of Kantian thought to broader trends in ethical thinking. It's derived from the thought that you should always follow moral rules, regardless of the positive or negative consequences of doing that. And I only mentioned divine command theory to let you know that this is like a predecessor historically to Kant. Kant's thing is not necessarily claiming or implying that God must exist, but it's compatible with the belief in God. So it's a little more secular what Kant gives us. It's based on reason. So we'll get into those details now. Okay, so what I'm now going to talk about is Kant's first major claim in the writing that we've been given. You may be wondering, why is it that the goodwill and the good intention is given center stage instead of, let's say, positive consequences or human happiness? He says, here's the reason. It's because the goodwill is the only thing in the world that's unconditionally good. And by contrast, all other supposedly desirable traits and attributes are only good under certain conditions and not others. So these other things are basically not unconditionally good. To show this, to illustrate this, I want us to try and list some other desirable attributes and character traits. Okay, so with your guys' help, I kind of want to go through a range of possible character traits that are usually the subject matter of moral praise. Think of the kind of stuff like if your parents were really proud of you, or if you someday become a parent, right, and you have a child or whatever, and you're very proud of the way they turned out. You might say to friends and other relatives, you know, it's so rewarding and satisfying that I have a child that ended up being such a blank type of person. Okay, so what kind of description words do you think could fill that blank space that would be like characteristics that are usually the subject matter of moral praise? People regard these things with positive regard. They praise them morally. They say it's a good thing to be that type of way. So what are some of those traits that either you or other people could be described with? Honest, caring. Okay, good. I like those. So let's use caring. I see intelligent. Yes, it's a good thing to be intelligent. You don't want to be idiotic. Positive attitude. So maybe like you mean like optimistic or something. Let's continue along the same lines. Generous. Okay, I see generous. Interesting. That is good. Let me try and fish around for a few that maybe haven't gotten there. Oh, I see brave already, so that's good. Thank you, Kobe. Brave. I was just going to ask about bravery or courage. That's already there. Brave, intelligent. Someone said responsible. Okay, that's fine. How about this? What about a person who doesn't give up and keeps going even when the things they're trying to do become difficult, or they encounter obstacles or hurdles? They stay focused on the goal and they see it through to a successful end. That could be, what kind of word would give us that description? Resilient, okay, determined, that kind of stuff. Persistent, sure. So I'll add a few of those things. Determined. And I mean, they're kind of synonymous, but whatever. I like the use of the term persistent. Okay, let's see. I've got a few more that I want to mention too. How about this? A kind of person who everyone likes them. They make friends very easily. What's the word for that? You know, they easily win friends, allies. Fun to be around type of person. Instead of the type of person that no one wants to talk to or hang out with because something about their personality. What kind of trait would that be? The one that easily makes a lot of friends and so forth. You say friendly, yeah. Charming, charisma, humor, that's all good, yeah. So maybe I'll go with charismatic, even though, you know, all of those are fair. Sociable, yeah. I'm trying to just summarize them a little bit and give charisma, but you could add some more of those on your own list. Okay, now he also lists a few things here that are like not necessarily character traits, but also he calls them gifts of fortune. So they're attributes that we think are good and that we want, but not necessarily on the same level as character traits. So these are things like wealth. You'd rather have some material wealth in life than to be poor and penniless. Power. It's always a good thing for a person to have some power to achieve the things they desire rather than to be powerless and having no control. Wealth, power. I would add one more up here. Like, how about like just physically strength or strong or fit? You know, if the person's athletic or in good health. So we can say strong or healthy, whatever. And then I've saved this for last. And Kant does too. So we'll see why in a moment. But happiness itself. Happiness. For John Stuart Mill and the utilitarians, this was all important. Like, this was the sole focus of ethics. Make as much happiness as possible in the world. But now we are dealing with Kant. And Kant says this about all the things on this list here. He's saying that none of these things are unconditionally good. None of them, zero. The only thing in the whole world, in the whole universe that is unconditionally good is the goodwill. And here's why these other things are not unconditionally good, okay? So now let's explain. For any of the qualities listed here, they can be good, and in most cases, they definitely are. But if the wrong kind of person has any of these qualities, then they can actually be used for bad or for evil. And that means that at that time, they're no longer good qualities. They become qualities that enhance a person's power to harm or commit wrong behavior. So like, for example, take intelligence. Intelligence in the right kind of person is a great thing. If you have a good will and you have good intentions, then you'll use that intelligence for the right kind of moral purposes, and it'll benefit you and other people. But what kind of person do you think that if this individual had intelligence, you'd be like, I don't know, I'd rather they not have so much intelligence. It's almost kind of scary. This is intelligence, but in the wrong kind of hands. So what kind of individual or person do you think intelligence would not be towards any positive good? Okay, so you say like Ted Bundy. Yeah, so that's one good example, Celine. And it's a fair point. It's not just Ted Bundy, though. It's any person out there who has evil intentions and a bad will. Okay, so intelligence is great, but if someone's out there like stalking you out, do you really want them to be the most intelligent person ever? You know, because that means they're just going to be more skilled, more resourceful, more careful and deliberate in the way they plan. And so if they have evil goals, they want to blow up a public place or commit a mass casualty attack or something, then intelligence just makes them more lethal and dangerous. If someone's going to be evil like that, you'd rather that they be extremely dumb and dim-witted so that they don't have the intellectual skills that make them more successful at whatever evil ambitions or goals they may have. Another case, yeah, like a dictator. And in general, without getting too specific, it's just anybody with a bad will. If a person has a bad will and bad intention, capabilities they have to do the terrible things they want to do. So intelligence, we can't say is always good. It can be good, but it can also be bad if it's in the wrong hands, if it's in the hands of someone with a bad will. And that then becomes the kind of pattern that we see as we go through all the other cases. Say that someone's brave, willing to face danger if it's right and necessary for things that they really care about. Well, bravery in a person with a good will is a fine thing. Like say it's a firefighter who's going to be willing to go and put their life at risk, rushing into a burning building to save people. Bravery is great there. But if it's bravery on the behalf of a person who wants to commit, like, I don't know, suicide bombing, or if it's bravery on the behalf of a person that's not afraid to face law enforcement as they go out and like commit a terrible crime, then you'd rather that that person be a little bit scared to face danger, because the bravery that they exhibit is going to tend towards evil and not towards good. Generous. Person's not stingy. They're willing to give of themselves to others. But if this is someone that's willing to give a lot of money to like a terrorist organization that they believe in and that they support, then we would rather they be stingy. The generosity in this case is not leading towards any kind of good result. And so generosity can be good if a person with goodwill has it and they're giving money to charity, to worthy causes, cancer research, COVID research, whatever. But a generous person who's got an evil set of intentions and goals, this is not good generosity. Determined, persistent, never giving up, seeing things through. Well, if the person's out there trying to like plot to kill a bunch of people and do something really evil, then you'd rather that they be lazy and not so persistent and determined, right? So determination, persistence, generosity, braveness, being intelligent, strong, right? Say someone's physically strong. Okay, well, if they have a good will and good intentions, then they'll use that strength for good purposes, right? If they see someone being harmed, they'll rush to their aid. If there's like a person trapped under a heavy object, they'll use their strength to get them out with no delay. But if a person's strong and they have evil intentions, do you really think that if a person is like a bully type, that you want them to be the strongest, brawniest, toughest person? No. If they have the intent or the will to harm and to be bad, then strength is just going to make them more dangerous. And charisma, making a bunch of friends, can be a good thing. But if the person's going to make a bunch of friends and recruit them to an evil way of life or an evil ideology, then we would not like that person to have such good charisma. Wealth, power, perhaps those are some of the most obvious. If a person holds power and they have a good will, that's what we would all want and hope for. But if it's like Hitler or somebody, then that's power that's in the wrong hands, and it's dangerous to have a person with that kind of mental disposition holding such power. So power cannot always be good. It's good sometimes, but bad when it's found in the wrong kind of hands. Same with wealth. Wealth enhances your ability to achieve whatever it is that you desire in life. And if you have a good will, then it's going to be a platform for good behavior. But if you have a bad will, just the opposite. And finally, we get to happiness. So happiness, Mill thought, is always good. It's what everyone seeks. It's the end of all human activity. It's the ultimate objective of everything we do. So shouldn't we make the promotion of happiness to the maximum degree the moral obligation that we always have? That's what Mill thought, but Kant says, no, no. Happiness itself is also not unconditionally good. And so let's explain why. A person can derive happiness from sources that are not moral at all. Have you ever heard of people who find it pleasurable for whatever weird reason to look at like gruesome images of people being killed or hurt on the internet? Suppose that someone, that's what they like to do with their free time. They like watching these videos, and it's sadistic and it's terrible, right? They're seeing people die and suffer, but they're getting a kick out of it. Now, does that mean that because happiness is a good thing, that we should serve this person as many of those videos as we can because it'll make them happier and happier? You'd probably say, no, that's disgusting and that's unethical. But how is it clear according to utilitarianism? Why? Well, from Kant's point of view, it is clear because this is done with a bad will and a bad intention. So the happiness derived is not moral. And this is the last thing I'll say, and he says this, which I think is quite interesting too. If a person has a bad will, like an evil person, and they're enjoying a lot of happiness, that doesn't gratify any rational and benevolent observer. When you see a person that is like a serial killer, like a Ted Bundy, Richard Ramirez, or whatever, and they're super content with themselves, feel like they're living their best life, smiling, laughing, finding it funny that they do those things. That kind of happiness doesn't strike you as gratifying or wholesome. Instead, it feels wrong and just disgusting. It's like that's undeserved happiness. This person, if they're that evil, isn't even worthy of the feeling of happiness. So happiness can be something that's not necessarily good if it's for the wrong reasons or if it's enjoyed by people who don't have good moral standing. So let me then mention that aside from all of these, in contrast, we have the goodwill. And the goodwill is unconditionally good. The goodwill is just trying to act deliberately to uphold the moral law. And if you do that, then you make the proper use of all these other qualities that are listed here, as we said. So with the goodwill, you'll make proper use and moral use of your intelligence or bravery or determination or generosity or wealth, power, happiness, etc. So if you want one thing that you should focus on and stand up and maintain in your life, Kant is telling you, don't prioritize any of these other qualities because by themselves, without a goodwill, there's no guarantee that that's going to lead you to a moral result, right? So if you just focus on being the smartest person ever and you become the smartest person in the room or in the world, you may achieve that, but unless you have a goodwill, there's no guarantee that you're going to be a moral person as well. So like pursuing intelligence is not the same thing as pursuing a goodwill. So the first priority then for you should be to have a goodwill and good intent. And if you do have it, then you'll properly utilize all the other attributes that men and women typically esteem and regard with praise. And you'll be worthy of the display and the experience of happiness too. So now I'll read the words of Kant, and that'll bring this full circle. Sometimes you have to explain it a little bit because reading it on a first pass can be a little tricky without some guidance from a professor like me. So let me now read it from him. And this is what he writes to begin our assigned reading on page 106 on the left side. He says, there is no possibility of thinking of anything at all in the world or even outside of it which can be regarded as good without qualification except a good will. Intelligence, wit, judgment, and whatever talents of the mind you might want to name are doubtless in many respects good and desirable, as are such qualities of temperament as courage, resolve, perseverance, but they can also become extremely bad and harmful if the will, which makes use of these gifts, is not good. The same holds with gifts of fortune, power, wealth, honor, even health, and that complete well-being and contentment with your condition, which is called happiness, can make for pride and often arrogance unless there is a good will to correct their influence on the mind. The sight of a being who is not graced by any touch of a pure and good will, but who yet enjoys uninterrupted prosperity can never delight a rational and impartial spectator. So therefore, a good will seems to constitute a necessary condition for even being worthy of happiness. Okay, so you see now that from Kant's view, advocating for the promotion of happiness is not necessarily in line with what morality would require, because the only unconditionally good thing is the goodwill, and so you have to attend to that first and foremost. Now, what is it then to act with a goodwill? Let me put it up here on the board again. I think I had it written before, maybe I mentioned it, but I want to make sure it's clear and draw your attention to it again. So you act with a goodwill, he says, when you act from the motive of duty to uphold the moral law? So you show goodwill when you do this, when you act specifically from the motive of duty to uphold the moral law. And now I want to mention and explain to you a little more about this topic or term, motive of duty. He says that the motive of duty is required for your action to have moral worth. He says only an action that is done from that motive of duty has moral worth, and an action which is done instead from the motive of inclination lacks moral worth. Okay, so let me write that and I'll explain with an example. Only an act done from the motive of duty has moral worth. And an act done from the motive of inclination has no moral worth. Sorry. Okay, so only an act that's done from the motive of duty has moral worth, but an act that's done from the motive of inclination has no moral worth. So quickly then, let's try to think about what the motive of inclination means by considering the meaning of the word inclination. This word inclination, I know it's probably not an everyday word that you're using all the time, but I bet you that you can figure it out if you don't already know it simply by reasoning from hearing it in a sentence. So if I tell you that I have an inclination to go for a run later today, or if I have an inclination to buy the PlayStation 5 this summer, what do you think that, in other words, means if I say these things? Having an inclination to do something is just, well, Kobe, you say tendency, sort of, but let me just correct a little bit. Because a tendency could just be something that you have a habit of doing, right? Like, I just have a habit of scratching my ear or something when I'm nervous. But it's not just having a random tendency, it's an affinity. Okay, good, Brandon. So it's a very high level language you're using when you say affinity, but I would just put it more simply, like it's just a desire to do something or a want, right? So it's like a want, a desire. That's just what an inclination is. So if I have an inclination to go for a run, that means that I just want to do it and I have a desire to do that. If I have an inclination to eat some tacos later today for Taco Tuesday, then that means that's something that I kind of feel like doing, I want to do, I desire to do that. Okay, so what this is then saying is, only when your action is based on motivation of doing your moral duty does it have moral worth. But if you're doing the action just because you feel like it, because you desire to do it, because you have a self-interested motive based around it, then that does not have any moral worth. Okay, so the motivation matters as to whether you're really acting from duty or from self-interest. Let me explain how the different motives can be seen in an example that Kant talks about. So Kant gives what he calls a shopkeeper scenario. I'm just going to write the word here. It's not important to have a specific place on the board, so I'm just writing the shopkeeper example, and we're going to talk about it. Shopkeeper example. This shopkeeper example is going to try and explain away a little bit the two types of motives that can be motive of inclination versus duty. So suppose this hypothetical, all right? Suppose that there is a shop and it's basically like a little convenience store type of liquor store place, and suppose there's a person who owns and operates and works at the register of the shop. So this is the shopkeeper. Now, one day a little kid walks in to buy an item at the shop. And this is, let's say, a very young, inexperienced purchaser, like a school-age elementary school child. And they see a candy bar, walk up to the counter, and they just simply ask, how much is this? They want the candy bar. Now, imagine putting yourself in the mind of our shopkeeper when the question was given to him. Now he asks, or he thinks these thoughts. He thinks, okay, so this kid is asking how much is that candy bar? And the real price, the retail value of it for any customer is $1. But this kid doesn't know that. That's why he's asking the price. And I could basically tell him something higher than $1. I could basically rip him off, gouge the price, inflate it. I could say to him at $3, $4, and he would pay it just as easily. I could pocket the extra money, and then I would have some extra money for myself to, I don't know, buy some lottery tickets or bus fare or whatever the case may be, parking meter. So he kind of really is tempted, I'm telling you, to rip the kid off. The kid says, how much is it? And he's like, in his mind, he's like, what am I going to tell him? I could tell him $1. That's the real price, but it's a golden opportunity to rip him off. There's a saying, stealing candy from a baby. I guess this is stealing money from a baby to give him candy. But anyway, he's tempted by the proposition. Simple, right? He wants to do it. He's very much inclined to do that. But at the last moment, he says, stupid ethics coming back to haunt me. I want to rip him off. I know I could get away with it. But it's just not right. It's just not fair. It's just not fair because that's not the real price. So what do? I want to rip him off, but it's not right. Anyway, okay, I guess I'll just have to say the right thing. So he opens his mouth and he's like, sorry, I was just thinking for a minute there, young sir. So you asked the price. It's $1. Okay, it's $1 for the candy bar. And the kid's like, you seem disappointed, but anyway, thank you. Here's $1. And he buys it and leaves. Okay, transaction over. Now keep that one scenario in mind as I change it just a little bit. So take another version of the same scenario. Still, we have a shopkeeper running a shop and a kid walks up with a candy bar asking the price. But imagine this is a different type of shopkeeper mentally, and when they see this kid ask the question, the first response with no hesitation is like, I'm so glad that you asked me, young man, because I'll tell you, it's $1. It's $1 for me, you, or anybody else. And that's what just basic fairness is. There's a lot of people out there in the world that they would rip a kid like you off and they would give you a wrong price. But I would never do that. And the reason is because I love children. And when I have a chance to be fair to them, I'm filled with such joy. It's euphoric to me. Like it's literally like a high. I mean, I'm going through like serious euphoric pleasure just because I'm being fair to you where other people might have ripped you off. I love kids and I love being fair. So it's $1, like I said. And kids like, it's a strange explanation, but thanks. And there's your $1. Okay. So look, two scenarios with a slight variation at the end. Now, two different motives were shown in these examples. One person had the motive of duty. The other person had the motive of inclination. So let me know, the first version, the first shopkeeper, the one that did not want to give the fair price but forced himself to do it anyway, recognizing that it was right. What was his motivation giving the fair price? Was it because he wanted to give the fair price? Was he already inclined to do that? Or did he do it because it was his duty? So I'm asking that question, motive of duty or inclination in the first shopkeeper example? That was duty, exactly, Justin. Yes, it was duty because he didn't feel like it. It wasn't like he did it because it was pleasurable or fun or enjoyable. He gives the fair price even though he totally feels upset about it, just because he knows that's the right thing to do. Okay, so what Kant thinks is that is the clearest case possible, a case like that, of doing an action from the motive of duty. When you have a contrary inclination, when you're disinclined to do what duty requires, but you force yourself to do it anyway, not because it's fun, not because you feel good about it, but just because you know that it's right. Now take the second person, the second shopkeeper. He also gave a fair price, but he did it not because it was duty, but because he just felt great about it and he loves the feeling of being fair. So the second person, it's not that he did something immoral, but since it was based on the motive of inclination, it's like it's amoral. It's not a moral choice to do it. He does it because he enjoys it. So what Kant is saying is that it's only the first type of shopkeeper whose action actually has any moral worth, because he does it strictly out of principle. He does it strictly because it's his duty, not because he enjoys it. The second person, because he enjoys to be fair, has done something not out of duty's sake, but rather for the sake of his own pleasure. And so the motive counts and matters according to Kant. It's only the motive of duty that can be the subject of moral praise. Now, every time I teach this, I feel like a little weird because I think some students will come away thinking, well, isn't that strange though? Isn't the second shopkeeper just nicer because they feel good about doing the right thing? They don't have to like force themselves against their contrary inclination to do the right thing. Well, having studied and taught Kant so many times, I think I understand what he means in a way. He's trying to basically say that you only really give a person moral praise for doing something that is not easy for them or pleasurable to begin with. right? When do you pat a person on the back and say, you know what, good on you, you did the right thing? Only when what they did was not something they were already inclined to do. Okay, so for someone who it's difficult for them to do it, they deserve legitimate moral praise. On the other hand, if someone does the right thing, but only because it was already fun or enjoyable, then they don't really deserve moral praise because it's simply on the pursuit of happiness that they've done it, and that's its own reward. Like, take another case, okay? Suppose that you have two people who do an identical running routine every morning. Okay, they both run 3 miles every morning without fail, so they're both daily runners. Kind of like me, I run almost every day too. But anyway, take the one person, when they get up and they get out there to run, they want to go right back to bed. They're like, I hate running. I hate the experience. I really don't like it. I don't like the sweating, the exertion, the soreness. Honestly, running sucks, and I'm not a fan. But I know that it's good for my health, and I feel an obligation to stay healthy and fit, and I know this is one thing that will do that. So even though I don't like it, I'm going to make myself do it, and I'm going to go through the motions to get in the 3 miles. Now, runner number two, another person, they do the same exact morning routine. In fact, maybe these two people pass each other on their opposite routes when they run. But person number two has a different attitude towards running. They're like, I love it. It's so enjoyable and fun. Everything the other person hates, they find pleasure in it. So they're like, I love the stress and the strain, the sweating, the soreness. I love being out there in the morning, just seeing people wake up. So this second person would have it no other way. It's like their favorite activity, the thing they enjoy more than anything. But they're both doing the same run. Now, who do you think about those two subjects would be the one that would be more reasonable to say, you know, good job for sticking to your running routine, you know, praising the person for doing something? Don't you find that it would be the first individual because they are doing it and it's difficult for them to do it? So they have to kind of force themselves to do it on a principle, not just because it's enjoyable in the first place. It would kind of be like with food. Would you ever go up to someone eating their favorite food and say, you know what, good job, you're eating your favorite food? You wouldn't do that. But if someone's eating something that they don't like just because they recognize that it's healthy, then you would say, good job sticking to your diet. I know you don't enjoy that stuff, but you can recognize that it's this thing that you ought to do for the sake of your health. So maybe one more example. Someone's wallet, you find it, right? And the question is, do I return this wallet? There's some money in it. Or do I just keep it and keep the money? Now, obviously, the wrong thing to do would be to just keep it and keep the money. But take two different people who return it. Person number one is returning it, but just because they hope that the person is going to give them a reward or maybe give them the money in the wallet. The other person finds it a hassle to return it, and they don't expect to receive any reward. They're like, I don't have a lot of time in my day, but I can see the identity of this person, so if I track them down, they'll probably appreciate that, and it's their item. So will I do this good deed expecting no reward? Well, how annoying is that? But they do it anyway. That person's doing it strictly for the sake of duty, not because they find it fun and pleasurable to give it back. And so when they give it back, moral praise is appropriate. In the other case, the person gives it back, but they're doing it because they think it'll be pleasurable when they receive a reward. It's the same action, but the one case is not really doing it for a moral reason. It's doing it for the sake of pleasure and self-interest. And if you do things based on your inclinations, sometimes that will align with what duty requires, with what duty calls for. But in most cases, what you want to do and what pleases you is not the same thing as what moral principles require. So you should more reliably follow principles of morality rather than your inclinations, because when the two things separate, duty calls, not your inclinations. Okay, so that's a little discussion, and let me read to you his words on the shopkeeper example so you can see his way of putting it. He said it this way. He said, I set aside actions which are really in accordance with duty, yet to which men have no immediate inclination, but perform them because they are impelled by some other inclination. Because in this case, to decide whether the action which is in accordance with duty has been done from duty or from a selfish purpose is easy. This difference is far more difficult to note in a third case where the action aligns with duty and the subject in addition has an inclination to do it. For example, that a dealer should not overcharge an inexperienced purchaser certainly accords with duty, like it's the same thing duty would require. And where there is much commerce, the prudent merchant does not overcharge, but keeps to a fixed price for everyone in general, so that a child may buy from him just as well as everyone else. Thus, customers are honestly served. But this is not nearly enough for making us believe that the merchant has acted this way from duty and from principles of honesty. His own advantage required him to. He cannot be assumed to have, in addition, an immediate inclination toward the buyer, causing him out of love to give no one, as far as price is concerned, any advantage over another. If that's the case, the action was done neither from duty nor inclination, but for a selfish purpose. So if the shopkeeper gives a fair price because he just loves being fair, then it's not really done from duty's sake, but pleasure, inclination. If he gives the fair price another possible scenario, because he's worried about the inflated price being discovered and maybe bad Yelp reviews coming out and then undermining the profitability of his business later. That would also be giving a fair price, but not necessarily for the moral reason, but instead because of a fear of lost revenue, and again, for self-advantage. So doing the right thing for the self-interested reasons is not doing it for the moral reasons where moral praise is actually appropriate. So your motive matters. Not just that you do the thing that morality requires, but that you do it strictly from a sense of duty. Or if you have a supporting inclination, that doesn't determine your action, that it's the principle itself which does. Okay, so there's still this one leftover question, and that's the big thing that we have to still deal with at the end of Kant's literature here that we read. You see him saying that you act with a good will when you act from the motive of duty to uphold the moral law. And it's only an act done from the motive of duty that receives moral credit. But now here's the last thing. What's the moral law then? What's this so-called moral law that we are being required, according to Kant, to act from a sense of duty to uphold? What is the moral law? How could we discover it? Okay, well, let me tell you what he thinks. Kant does believe that there is an objective moral law, that there's an objective and universal moral law that holds on all of us at all times and all places. So some people believe moral relativism, which says that morality is different from person to person, place to place, or time to time. Like maybe in the past, some things were considered wrong and they're not considered wrong anymore. But no, Kant says no, morality is universal. It's not changing. It's objective, and it's the same at all times, places, and across all people. What is this objective moral law? He says it's something that we can discover through the use of reason. Okay, so reason, human reason, comes to us from either God or from evolution, but wherever it is from, we have it, and that's what makes us the special life forms that we are, that can talk like we can, that can hold these lectures, that can, have academic subjects of study, technology, and all the rest. So reason is the source of knowledge that we can tap into to reveal what the moral law is. And what Kant says is that when you use your either God-given or naturally evolved, depending on your point of view, when you use your human reason to tap into the moral law, you'll reflect on a principle that he calls the categorical imperative. So this categorical imperative is huge for Kant's philosophy. It's the principle that's supposed to help us reveal what the moral law commands and forbids. So here is the categorical imperative. So there's actually two different versions of the categorical imperative. So I'm going to teach you about both because Kant talks about both. Let's say categorical imperative version 1. That's why I put V1 right here. Here's what it says. And before I say one last thing about the whole concept that we use reason to discover this moral law, that might sound weird to you, but reason can discover a lot of objective facts about the universe. For example, how do we ever build an atomic bomb or a microwave or a computer chip? These things are not just random, like playing with silly putty and seeing what happens, but it's definitely based on clear principles of physics, electronics, engineering, and etc. So if reason can be used to discover facts about mathematics, trigonometry, geometry, physics, the periodic table of elements, then it's that same kind of source of knowledge that we can tap into, which Kant thinks can disclose the facts about morality to us as well. So if you're confident enough in human reason that you don't think your microwave is going to blow up or something, and that all this telecommunications technology works as it does, then you should have a similar level of confidence that human reason can be revealing of the moral law. Categorical imperative version 1 now. To be fair, it's going to look a little complicated at first because he uses some jargon that takes a moment to explain. But just let me write it, and then when I explain it afterwards, you'll see that it's actually not so confusing as it may appear at first. So here's what the first version of categorical imperative says. And again, this will help us discover the moral law. So it says, act always so that the maxim which describes your action could be willed to be a universal law. Okay, so I'll read it and then explain. It says this: act always in this way. Act always so that the maxim which describes your action could be willed to be a universal law. So for us to all be on the same page and understand this, we have to quickly think about what this word maxim means and what it would mean to be able to will a maxim to be a universal law. Okay, so I'm going to erase the top part here so I can write some notes, and we're going to talk about what is a maxim. So a maxim is just like a person's individual policy of action behind what they do when they do something deliberate. So you can think of it as your intention or policy when you do an action. And the form that a maxim takes is a statement which says what you will do under what circumstances. So the general format of a maxim, is a statement that takes this form. I will do some action X. I'm just labeling it X because this could be any number of possible things, so it's just a variable for now. I will do X in, and then we label the circumstances that you would do that action in, and just label it with a placeholder of the letter C. So I will do action X in circumstances C. That's a maxim. For every deliberate action that you do on purpose of your own free will, there's a maxim associated with it if you would just think about it for a minute. And that maxim is, again, it's just your policy of action in that scenario. So like right now, you're watching a YouTube lecture for a class that you're taking at Cal State Fullerton. That's what you're doing right now, and you're doing it on your own free will. So here's my question. What will be your maxim at this moment? We'll start with that. And I can give you the first half pretty easy. I will attend a class lecture. Now, what is your policy? And not my attendance policy, but you, the student. Like, what are the circumstances where you say, in this circumstance, I will attend a lecture? And it doesn't have to be anything too lofty or virtuous, just something simple. What has been your principle of attending? You say, I will attend a lecture. In what circumstances? What are the circumstances that lead you to be at this meeting right now? That's what I'm asking. So we can maybe specify the current maxim of your current action. We know what you're doing. What are the circumstances in which you are doing this? Not tired? Okay, I will attend a class lecture in circumstance to learn. That's very noble, Kobe, yes, because what you're talking about is that it's the content of the lecture itself that you want to learn and that you care about. Janice, a little more practical minded because you paid for it, that's good. I like Brandon's a lot because it's very simple and it's just according to the schedule, right? It's like, I will attend a lecture if it's being held at that time. I would only add maybe one more slight qualification, okay, to the way Brandon put it, because it's not just when a class is in session, but to be fair, it's also when you're capable of attending. Like sometimes people are caught up sick in an emergency or whatever, and that's a valid excuse. So let me put it this way, and I would just leave it at this, even though some of our maxims may differ a little bit, but just as a generic example. Suppose right now, here's your situation. I will go to a lecture, I will attend a lecture in the circumstance that I'm able to, and it is in session at that time. Okay, so that can be a quick example of your current maxim. I will attend a lecture when it's being delivered at that time, and if I'm able. Because that is what you're doing. You're able, you're here obviously, and it's in session. Now, this principle of the categorical imperative is just saying, take your maxim, your individual maxim, and then convert it into a statement of universal law. So when we transfer this into a universal law, the universal law version of it just becomes a statement that all people will do X in the same circumstances. C. All people will do X in circumstances C. So imagine your maxim that you'll go to class when you're able to go and when it's in session is stated as a universal law. All people shall go to class if they are capable of it and it's in session. Now, if that were a universal law, if it were, there would be no issues with that. That would just mean people are all going to their duly scheduled classes that they've enrolled in when they're able to be there. And that would not be contradictory, nor would it be undesirable. So it passes the bar, basically, of the categorical imperative, and therefore it's morally permitted by the moral law. So congratulations, you've done nothing wrong by attending this class, because you're acting based on a maxim that could be willed to be a universal law. The more interesting things to consider, though, are actions which fail this test and are therefore ruled out by the moral law and are morally impermissible. So I'll just give you a few random quick examples of that. Suppose that you're waiting in a long line, and sometimes when you're waiting in a long line and you're not being patient, you don't want to stand at the back. You wish it was moving faster. So suppose someone's standing closer to the back of a long line for something, and they want to get in faster. So they might be thinking of doing what? Do you guys kind of think you can follow my example here to the next step? The person in line, seeing how long it is, losing their patience, is thinking of doing what action? Let's see, just give me the assist to the next step here. We're talking about a person in line cutting, correct, cutting, yes. So this person wants to cut that line. Let's suppose they will, and let's consider their maxim, okay, the maxim of the cutter. So we already know the maxim starts with, I will cut the line. And what are the circumstances of our hypothetical cutter? Nothing too special, just I will cut a line in what circumstance? What do you think would be C in this case? Of the cutter, not you, but just a cutter. I will cut the line when or if what? If the line is long, very good, Naaman, yes, if there's a long line. Well, not the reason, but rather the circumstance. That would be it, Jerry. But anyway, I guess we could say because I'm in a rush. Anyways, though, I will cut the line when there's a long line. Now imagine that's a universal law. Imagining it as a universal law, you have to think hypothetically. You don't just have to think, imagine most people cut. No, literally, like imagine if every single person was bounded by your action as though it was the law. So if all people cut the line whenever there's a long line, does that work? No. Is it possible for everyone to cut? Of course not, because if everybody cuts simultaneously, then there's no longer any line to cut. People have to stand single file for a line to exist. So if everyone's cutting each other, then you just have a mob gathering towards and massing towards the entrance of whatever the thing is. And so there's no longer any line that exists. Furthermore, imagine everybody cuts, right? Then what would happen to the position that the cutter gets when they advance in the line through cutting? Does the cutter even want everybody to cut? No. Because if everybody did what they are doing, then what would happen as soon as they cut? Let me know that one. What happens if the universal rule instead of the exception is that people all cut? Then what would be the point of cutting? Because as soon as one cutter cut, what would happen? You feel me? You understand this example? So if 100% of people are all cutting, then suppose one guy cuts. What will be the point? Because as soon as he does it, what will happen? He'll get cut himself. Someone else will cut in front of him. So what does the cutter really want, he or she or they? They don't want everybody to cut. In fact, to the contrary, they want everybody else, except them, to follow the normal rule of staying in their position in the line so that when they advance through breaking the rule, they'll be able to take advantage of all the other people who still follow that same rule. So it's like even the cutter themselves know that they're doing something that cannot be done universally by everybody, because then it would either not be possible to do it or it wouldn't even be desirable because there'd be no advantage to be gained, you see? So that's reason, Kant says, telling the person that if you do that, you're doing something wrong, and you know that because think it through, you're doing something that not everybody can do and it still work. So Kant says reason can determine for you, if you just think a situation through, consider your maxim, elevate it to the status of a universal law, and then ask, would it be possible for all to act that way? So beneath the somewhat technical looking presentation of this principle, it says something actually quite straightforward, that it's only morally acceptable to do actions that would be possible and not undesirable for everybody else to do in the same situation. If you want to take an action where you basically create an exception to the rule for yourself, you're doing something which you recognize yourself and you wouldn't even want all people to do, then you know it's wrong and you should stop doing that. Take other examples. Someone's going to take a free ride on the subway. They're going to jump the turnstile because they don't want to pay the fare. So their maxim is, I will ride for free on the subway when I want to take a ride. If that's a universal law, then all people riding the subway will not pay. And if that was the case, then the subway would no longer receive funding, so the service would have to be discontinued, and there would no longer be a subway for the free rider to ride on. So does the free rider want everybody to ride for free? No. They want the subway to receive funding, so they want to be able to take advantage of everyone else following the typical rule of paying. And once again, you see it's not possible for everybody to act in the same way as the one person does. Therefore, they're definitely violating moral law. Okay, so in any situation that you're in then, ask yourself whether this action would remain consistent and not undesirable if all people were to do it alike. Kant gives an example of someone who requests a loan knowing that they have no desire to pay it back, but also knowing that the only way the loan will be given is if they make a false promise to repay. And he says that if everybody made a false promise of repayment on loans, then loans would no longer exist because the lenders would know that every such promise is a lie. So the liar doesn't want everyone to lie. They want enough people to tell the truth so that their lie will be perceived as a true statement, and therefore they'll be able to receive the advantages that come with telling such lies. That's why he says that you cannot claim that lying is permitted under the universal law, because if it was the universal rule, then lying would no longer be effective because there would be no presumption of truth, so the lie would never even pass plausibility in the first place. Okay, so double check on your behavior when you're doing things to make sure it's something that could be done by all. And if it could not be done by all, or if you would not want it to be done by all either, then you know it's wrong. There's a second version of the categorical imperative. I said that there's two. So we can quickly make short work of the second one at the beginning of our lecture on Thursday. So that'll be our first order of business on Thursday, just to wrap up the last few loose ends here. And then we will turn the page to the next author. So I want you to try and read Peter Singer and his article, Rich and Poor. And then we will start talking about applying these ethical theories to real issues and cases, like do we have obligations to help the global poor or not? Okay, guys, so for now anyway, I think we're all good. We run low on time. So just let me know, are y'all good to go? And if so, just let me know that, and then I'll be able to close the stream. I don't like to close until I see a few goodbye or thank you, or just making sure we're all together at the end. So everything's right? Let me know. Okay, thanks again, guys. Perfect. So don't forget your essays due Thursday, and I'll be available through email between now and then for anything else if you need it. So for now, I'm signing off. Take it easy, and I'll see you on Thursday. Bye-bye.